Hello. So this is a PowerPoint I put together for my college classes. Cultural competence in social work. Standards. Cultural competence and social diversity. Social workers should understand culture and its function in human behavior and society, recognizing the strengths that exist in all cultures. Social workers should have a knowledge base of their clients' cultures and be able to demonstrate competence in the provision of service that are sensitive to clients' cultures and to differences among people and cultural groups. Social workers should obtain education about and seek to understand the nature of social diversity and oppression with respect to race, ethnicity, national origin, color, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, age, marital status, political beliefs, religion, immigration status, and mental or physical disability. Cultural competence requires self-awareness, cultural humility, and the commitment to understanding and embracing culture as central to effective practice. So we start with self-awareness. Social workers shall demonstrate an appreciation of their own cultural identities and those of others. Social workers must also be aware of their own privilege and power and must acknowledge the impact of this privilege and power in their work with and on behalf of clients. Social workers will also demonstrate cultural humility and sensitivity to the dynamics of power and privilege in all areas of social work. Cross-cultural knowledge. Social workers shall possess and continue to develop specialized knowledge and understanding that is inclusive of, but not limited to, the history, traditions, values, family systems, and artistic expressions such as race and ethnicity, immigration and refugee status, tribal groups, religion and spirituality, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, social class, and mental or physical abilities of various cultural groups. Next, we have cross-cultural skills. Social workers will use a broad range of skills, micro, meso, and macro, and techniques that demonstrate an understanding of and respect for the importance of culture in practice, policy, and research. Then we have service delivery. Social workers will be knowledgeable about and skillful in the use of service, resources, and institutions, and be available to serve multicultural communities. They shall be able to make culturally appropriate referrals within both formal and informal networks, and shall be cognizant of and work to address service gaps affecting specific cultural groups. Empowerment and advocacy. Social workers shall be aware of the impact of social systems, policies, practices, and programs on multicultural client populations, advocating for, with, and on behalf of multicultural clients and client populations whenever appropriate. Social workers should also participate in the development and implementation of policies and practices that empower and advocate for marginalized and oppressed populations. Professional education. Social workers shall advocate for, develop, and participate in professional education and training programs that advance cultural competence within the profession. Social workers should embrace cultural competence as a focus of lifelong learning. Leadership to advance cultural competence. Social workers shall be change agents who demonstrate the leadership skills to work effectively with multicultural groups in agencies, organizational settings, and communities. Social workers should also demonstrate responsibility for advancing cultural competence within and beyond their organizations, helping to challenge structural and institutional oppression and build and sustain diverse and inclusive institutions and communities. Language and communication. Social workers shall provide and advocate for effective communication with clients of all cultural groups, including people of limited English proficiency or low literacy skills, people who are blind or have low vision, people who are deaf or hard of hearing, and people with disabilities. So now we move on to some definitions. So we have definition of culture. Culture is an integrated pattern of human behavior that includes thoughts, behaviors, communication, action, custom, beliefs, values, and institutions of a racial, ethnic, religious, or social group. Social groups may include being lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people, people with disabilities, older adults, military families, and immigrants and refugees. Sexism is discrimination against individuals who culturally identify with and or present as a different sex and gender than assigned at birth, and privilege conveyed on individuals who identify with and or present as the same sex and gender as assigned at birth. It is a form of sexism based on sexual and gender identity and expression. Cultural competence. Cultural competence refers to the process by which individuals and systems respond respectfully and effectively to people of all cultures, language, classes, races, ethnic backgrounds, religions, spiritual traditions, immigration status, and other diversity factors, in a manner that recognizes, affirms, and values the worth of individuals, families, and communities, and protects and preserves the dignity of each. Cultural competence is a set of congruent behaviors, attitudes, and policies that come together in a system or agency or amongst professionals and enable the system, agency, or those professionals to work effectively in cross-cultural situations. Cultural humility. For development of cultural competence, knowledge, training, acquiring, and use of skill sets to be effective, we need to be both aware and attentive to the dynamic quality of culture and be committed to the practice of cultural humility. Cultural humility is an important facet of professional identity that encourages self-involvement and involvement of self through one's personal and professional life. It also includes involvement of the profession's identity that bridges social distance as well as power differentials between the social worker and client systems. Cultural humility refers to the attitude and practice of working with clients at a micro, meso, and macro levels, with the presence of humility while learning, communicating, offering help, and making decisions in professional practice and settings. Then we have intersectionality theory. Intersectionality theory, grounded in a feminist perspective, examines forms of oppression, discrimination, and domination as they manifest themselves through diversity components. Components which include multiple identities such as race and ethnicity, immigration, refugee and tribal status, religion and spirituality, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, social class, and mental or physical disabilities. So now we get to that I've mentioned a few times, the macro, meso, and micro. So I'm going to start with the macro practice. Macro practice, social work practice aimed at bringing about improvement and changes in the general society. Such activities include some types of political action, community organization, public education, campaigning, and the administration of broad-based social services agencies or public welfare departments. So macro is everything on the large scale, the social, the community. Meso practice refers to social work practice primarily with families and small groups. Important activities at this level include facilitating communication, meditation, and negotiation, educating, and bringing people together. Micro practice. The term used by social workers to identify professional activities that are designed to help solve the problems faced primarily by individuals, families, and small groups. Usually micro-practice focuses on direct intervention on a case-by-case basis or in a clinical setting. So why is it important? It is increasingly important for service providers to respond to the demographic changes in the United States. Social workers must have the ability to adapt and modify the ways they provide services to the ever-changing population around them. Not only does a cultural competent provider have the capability to communicate effectively across the barriers of language and culture, but he or she is more attuned to his or her client's needs. By possessing this capability, one could directly affect a client's treatment and outcome. A culturally competent provider can better assure that a client receives the most appropriate and effective services, especially a client from a historically neglected community and or population group. In short, being culturally competent is good practice. So then we have, what can you do to enhance cultural competence in your work? So it is important to remember that no one can be competent in any culture, not even his or her own. However, there are ways that one can effectively interact with people from diverse communities and groups. Cultural competence involves the following: exploring your own culture, beliefs, and values, being aware of your own worldview, exploring the reasons you may feel uncomfortable with folks that are different from you, gaining knowledge of different cultural practices and worldviews, push yourself to learn about communities that are different from your own, developing skills for communication and interaction across cultures, becoming familiar with the history of the community you work in or work with. If you are working with immigrant populations, become familiar with their history of immigration and of migration, believing you can serve individuals that are different from you, developing a list of professionals for consultation on multicultural issues, engaging in dialogue with colleagues, and continue to increase cultural literacy, assuming that there is heterogeneity within the ethnic group. Do not generalize. And when in doubt, ask. There is nothing worse than making assumptions about a group with whom you're not familiar with. So that's it for this video.